So we're going to end today with a unique opportunity to hear from. We originally had 3 oil and gas workers, and unfortunately, one was unable to make it. But we're going to hear from some workers who are advocates for mental health in their industry. From the feedback we got at last year's summit, we were told that hearing from oil and gas workers would be a welcome addition to the summit. So we are very pleased to have Francisco and Jason and describe their thoughts and perspectives on mental health needs and challenges from their perspectives. So Francisco and Jason, if you could turn your cameras on, I'll turn the floor over to you.
Hi, everyone. Can everybody see it?
I've got my camera turned on here too, folks, but I'm not seeing it as well. So
okay, all right. We just see the cover page there.
There we go.
Anyways, I'll start. My name is Francisco Valenzuela. I am a safety advisor at one of the oil sand sites here in northern Alberta. I've had lots of conversations with Sarah. I've been doing the remote work, the drive in, drive out, or fly in, fly out for 13 years now. And I've seen the ups and downs of the cyclical nature of our industry, boom and bust cycles, and also some of the challenges, I guess, the mental health ones, felt the mental health ones, and experienced a lot of the relationship challenges. One of the first comments I received going up into this lifestyle to the work site was from a wise, grizzled oil and gas veteran that had done this fly in, fly out work for numerous years, decades. And I was like, wow, I'm finally big oil. And he said, kid, you ain't big oil yet. And I said, well, what do you mean? He says, you're not big oil till you've got a divorce or 2 under your belt. And I was a little bit taken aback by that, but 13 years later, I can officially say I am big oil. And that's the disturbing part of, that's almost like a badge of honor at times. When you think about, you sacrifice everything when you enter this industry. It's an incredible industry, but you need to know what you're getting into before you go in is what I find. So, it's tough parenting when you're away from home. It's tough to maintain relationships when you're away from home. You end up having a surrogate family at work, which is your workmates, and they help out a lot. And then you have your family at home. And oftentimes you actually spend more time at work. At least I did. And I missed numerous years of my children's life by being away, 20 or more days at a time, and then only home for 5 days to a week at a time. And then it's hard to reconnect. So so that's a little bit about me. I also am the founder of a resource website for fly in, fly out workers, and that's FIFOforreal.com or .ca, I should say. And just trying to provide resources to workers like myself just entering into the industry, or those in the industry looking for resources on how to thrive in this lifestyle, because you can.
Thank you, sir. Jason, would you like to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. First of all, I'd just like to thank everybody for the opportunity to come and say my piece in regards to my own struggles within mental health, and where I can see this industry going. So again, my name is Jason Ross. I'm health and safety manager for Bird Construction. I've been working in the fly in, fly out, or drive in, drive out for I would say 20 of my 25 years. I've been health and safety for in and around the same. My first 5 years of my business was involved with emergency response services, and then I switched into the health and safety world when I first made my way to Fort McMurray, Alberta. So a lot of years doing 2 weeks in, 2 weeks out, 14 and 7, that kind of stuff, as well as some 10 and 4 shifts. So I got a real keen understanding of the expectations of a workforce going into that environment. I went out there at about I'd say I was 25 years old, so I was fairly green to say the least. So, like Francisco mentioned previously, I was kind of mentored. I found a couple of the Grizzly guys out there, and I was mentored under the same kind of mindset as he was, right? So it was, you got to put your time in. You're going to go through some struggles. I, like Francisco, through my years of rotation out west, have gone through one divorce as well. So I know the struggles that it takes on marriages, on family lives, on your impacts with your children as well. So I got to a point where I've actually kind of switched my industries. Now I'm working in a nuclear facility, but it's still drive in, drive out. So currently I'm away from my family from Monday to Friday, and then I am available to get home on the weekends. But I almost, it's strange to say this, but I almost miss being away on the rotationals for the 2 and 2, because I found that I was able to have more time with my family. Right now, I get home on a Friday evening and I'm packing up to head out on a Sunday evening. So, I've got a 2-year-old daughter at home, and she sees me for, less than 48 hours, and then I'm gone again, and I'm missing so much in her life. But on the flip side, we do this for a reason, to be able to, build good opportunities for her family. So I've made it my path moving forward as a health and safety manager to push the mental health as much as I can, due to firsthand experience. So about 4 years ago, I was on a project in northern Manitoba, did a really long stretch. I think I was in for, I don't know, in around 40 days. It was coming up to Christmas, and it was time to get out of sight. So we were leaving Snow Lake, Manitoba, en route to Flin Flon. And I had what I thought was a heart attack. So I was unfortunately driving a vehicle home with a couple of colleagues, and I thought in my head that I was having a heart attack. But at the time, I wasn't able to communicate that with my colleagues, because I had no idea what was going on. That emotions kind of fled my body after about 15 minutes. I was able to focus, continue on the road, and then it came back again. And I got to the point where I was finally able to speak to my colleague. Bob just mentioned that I wasn't feeling good, and he'd have to take over the driving. So as I'm sitting in the back seat of that car trying to get myself to the airport, the only thing I could think in my head was I wasn't going to make it home to my family, that I'm going to die in this car in northern Manitoba, and that was going to be the end of my days. Thankfully, 4 years later, here I am, and I was able to, reach out to some friends, some colleagues, some professionals to understand what I was going through. And ultimately, it came up that I was dealing with anxiety. I was diagnosed with complex PTSD and generalized anxiety as well. So I made it my passion within my own organization to put controls in place for folks like ourselves that work in FIFO organizations to have the correct tools to be able to manage that kind of stuff. So that's where we are today. That's where I'm very excited to be here. So that's me in a nutshell.
Thank you, Jason. So both of you gentlemen mentioned, family stresses during your introductions, and how those affected your relationships. And for fly in, fly out workers, especially, interpersonal relationships, parenting, maybe step parenting at times, you get into financial stresses, and in those roles that you have at home. How do you guys handle that stress, or maybe not handle that stress when it comes up? And then, maybe talk a little bit about conflict resolution and the differences between conflict resolution at home versus what you have to deal with in the workplace.
Sure, I can touch base on some of that. One of the biggest challenges I found was the transitioning. And in Sarah's presentation, we looked at that slide, because we spend so much time in this it's a bit of a pressure cooker. A lot of big decisions need to be made, time constraints, resource restraints, and you make decisions, you take a lot of emotion out of a lot of these decisions, right? We're in the process of looking at things rationally, logically, what's best for the business, and what in fact benefits the most people too. So then when you get home, now you've got like almost completely different conflict resolution styles. Now you've got to, there's the aspect of learning how to hold space for your spouse. One of the things is oftentimes it depends on how well you communicated with your partner or spouse or family when you were away from home. And one of those challenges is there's a lot of misunderstandings between each other. Like I know, for instance, how I lived fly in, fly out was very different to how my family experienced it at home. They imagined it's almost resort-like. Many a times I had to defend the fact that it's not like a resort, you know. Yes, we get our food cooked for and our lunch is made, and you know, we go out, but our days, you know, you wake up at 3 or 4 in the morning, get on a bus, go to work 12 hours, get on that same bus, get in the line, go eat, then you go back to your room. Oftentimes you're too tired to go to the gym, or and it just makes things tough. The pandemic made it so much worse because then you're isolated from your family at home, then you're even isolated from, like I said earlier, your work family, because you know you couldn't spend time together with anybody. It was, you know, go to work, you're isolated at work, come back to camp, you get your food, you're isolated back in your room. You know, I knew many workers from the East Coast, and they actually would stay in Edmonton, for instance, rather than go home, and that was for 6 months. So imagine trying to maintain a relationship over 6 months when you don't really see each other. So it's very, very difficult.
Absolutely. I can add a couple points to that. I think Francisco covered, you know, much like most of us would have the same response. And what I can say is that always felt when I was coming home, and I still feel like this when I'm coming home after a shift, that I'm a burden. I'm getting in way. My wife has her way of doing things with my child and their family. You know, it functions very well without me. And then I find that when I get home, that I'm almost throwing a wrench into the process. And it's you know, my wife will mention things like that as well. Like, you know, you're not, you know, viciously, but it's almost like I'm getting in the way. Like she has her routines to, you know, raise her child and to get through their days, and then I'm coming in with my mindset where, you know, I haven't seen anybody in 5 days, and now I want to jump in and be super dad. Well, that's not the case. For us being away from our home and our families, we need to understand that, you know, their lives are still continuing on without us. So we need to be able to appreciate the systems that they have in place already that allows them to function and continue to go on when we're not here. So we basically need to come up with a game plan to be able to, you know, embed ourselves back into that existing process that they have running, and not become a hindrance more than a help. So those are struggles that I see, you know, continuously. And the second part that I'd just like to add on that, especially when I was out west doing the long shifts in and out, I found that I was basically planning my life away. What I mean by that is I go out for 2 weeks, and then within those 2 weeks, I was, you know, subconsciously planning my days off already. So I would have, you know, scheduled things to go on my days off, and I'd get home, and it basically felt that I'd already replayed that so many times in my head that my rotation was already done at home, and then I'm packing my bags to go back. And you have to do that in a sense because you're gone. So you want to be able to put as much time and resources into your family life when you're at home. But the fact that you're already forecasting, you know, 3 4 months out, it feels like you've played your life out in front of you. And the years just went by so fast when I was doing those long shifts that, you know, I can see the struggles that everybody dealing with that lifestyle right now still has. So thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
Jason, sorry. One of the things that you mentioned is that part, and I think understanding has to go both ways. Is your partner needs, you know, the partner at home also needs to understand that you also need to be integrated into those routines. Because if you're not ever integrated into those routines, that's when kind of resentment starts to sit in, because you're making these sacrifices to be away and provide, and then you come home, and then when you're not reintegrated into those routines and feel like a family versus almost like a burdensome guest, then that resentment ends up going both ways. And then that's kind of the harbinger of doom there for any relationship, any marriage. And that was a difficult part to try and reconcile. And that's why, for instance, counseling is so important, and why I do think we need to have it available for folks at site.
Fully agree. And that kind of trick jumps into the next question, which you guys were just talking about. You know, how do you deal with the stress? You know, from having to, your families have to depend on others so much when you guys are away from home. You know, you feel powerless, you know, you feel maybe even guilty or maybe shame for not being there when your family needs you. I know personally from my side, today I'm sitting in Midland, Texas. Well, I'm from Central Oklahoma in Tornado Alley. So if a storm comes up, they're having to deal with that without me. So it definitely leads to some guilt from my end on, on their abilities. So can you talk to those strategies?
Sure, Wesley, I'll jump in there, and you just hit it. So prime example. So I currently work. I'm about a 3.5 hour drive from home, 3 hours on a good day. But we had an ice storm. That's April. We just had an ice storm. So there was a storm rolling through last week, and I'm sitting up here. I've got my responsibilities, to make sure that I'm here for site, and then young daughter, wife at home, in-laws in the basement, and we're prepping for a major storm to come across. So all that starts to resonate in your mind, like should I pull up out of here? I've got my responsibility at work. What can I do? And what I do there is I've got a core group of my close friends that I can lean on, and not everybody has that, but I reach out to 2 or 3 of my buddies that are close to my wife and my parents, that if things get really bad, that they've got a direct line to go do the things that I can't. That adds guilt to us too, right? It's like you question, it's, is what I'm doing, being away from my family, is the payoff exactly what it needs to be? Or you start to rethink your decisions to be away to make the big dollars, or should you be at home to be closer but sacrifice on your career side, right? So it's a battle that we play all the time, right? So, and then dealing with the stressors for me, it's throughout my career being away, I've always had a vent, and utilize the gym to be able to support that, and then having a key 2 or 3 people within your work environment that you can build a good relationship to, that you're able to unload a little bit and de-stress and have those conversations. For the longest time I wasn't able to do that. I come from the old school mentality where you suck it up and you move forward, and a guy's only as tough as the next guy standing beside him. So I wasn't able to have those communications. But what I've learned over the years is that I need to be able to find those 2 or 3 people that I can vent to release the stressors, for sure. So, Francisco.
Yeah, like I used to run a lot around camp, just to help de-stress, right? The physical activity component is so important, which is why having even like personal trainers or camp coordinators that can have activities, like so for instance, site I'm at, we had some pickleball tournaments, and that was a great way for some social engagement with other workers. That was fun. That was get your heart rate going, those things. And it just was some of those things to take the edge off being away from home, right? Like, the shame part is huge. The guilt, kind of one of the maladaptive or coping mechanisms or numbing behaviors I found is, because we're in an industry that pays fairly well, is you go to a retail therapy. It was stated earlier, right? You go online shopping type of thing, or for instance, you buy everything you can for your family, but that keeps you stuck in that cycle. We'd often refer to it as the golden handcuffs. Is now you're stuck kind of having to make that kind of money. You bought a new vehicle, you bought a new trailer or boat or any of the toys, or you're doing all these trips, and then you're stuck. I had a conversation with my son. My son's 22 now, and he had me away from the time he was 7, right? So one of the tough things for him was he said, Dad, I didn't want things. I just wanted your time, and just hits you.
No, absolutely. I think that's certainly something that most your fly in, fly out, or drive in, drive out workers would echo. So, Jason, you touched on a topic of friend groups and your inner circle that you have at home. Can you kind of go into the dynamics with when you're working in this type of industry and on this type of schedule? Kind of some of the nuances of maintaining those social groups, and I know sometimes it's difficult to keep those close friends, or they're on a different schedule than you are. They want to go out and do things. You get home, like you said earlier, you want to be super dad. You want to spend all your time with your family, where those other relationships may get pushed to the back burner, so to say.
Yeah, another great point, Wesley. So, I come from a fairly small town, so thankfully I grew up with a group of guys that I've called my friends since probably grade 10. We had 5, 6 of us that were always together. We ended up going to college together, and we still have a relationship together. But as I got into the rotational work, being away from home, the majority of those guys still stayed there. So, getting home, trying to continue those relationships, it was a struggle, and it still is a struggle, even on the drive in, drive out. Now I'm home on the weekends, but we've all got our families and our children at home. So to continue to try and find the time to fit in, the home life responsibilities with, still having the for me, the guy time, the one-on-one, going out to having a round of golf. It's almost like you get back to having to, look 3 months ahead to schedule to get everybody aligned to be able to communicate. And to be honest with you, those are things that we need to, continue to have in place, because, we get stress relief from being able to vent with our partners and our wives, but it's a different dynamic when you've got your core group of your close friends that you can actually get out and blow off a little bit steam, and be yourself around those folks. But good point, Wesley, and I still find it's a struggle to be able to continue those relationships. So
Thank you, Jason. Francisco, do you have anything on that topic?
Yeah, like, and Jay, I know, like you said, you had this small town, small group of friends. One of the things I found was a lot of the illusions and misconceptions in this industry. I had a lot of changing of my friend groups, because they would look at you and they'd, I'd had comments like, "You guys get paid too much," and and you're away from home, and you're like, "Well, would you sacrifice that time for home?" I'd always say, "Well, we get paid regularly for what we do, but we get a premium for missing out on birthdays, on Christmases, Thanksgivings, Halloweens, and those kind of things that help kind of keep you connected to your family." And that can be stressful, because then at times too is, and again, another poor coping mechanism is then you kind of like, "Well, hey, I still want to keep my friends or anything. Let's go out. I'll take care of drinks, or I'll buy supper." And then you start feeling a little bit like a wallet in some ways, right? So it's tough, because we don't go into this knowing what it's going to be like. So everything's a little bit different. And the other thing is you go into it, and you do feel like it's such a glorious and lifestyle. Hey, you fly to work, that's pretty cool. Everybody else just drives to work, right? You work on some tremendous projects, some of the biggest projects on the world. There's a ton of prestige added to that, and you work with some of the best people in the industry on those big mega projects. That's where I met Jason, and we started talking. And the work itself is exciting, so you don't want to give that up, but there's definitely challenges, and knowing how to navigate that is that tough part.
well, you hit something odd. One more point there, Wesley. You just reminded me something, Francisco, of one of like I just mentioned. I've got a really good group of friends, and this gentleman might be listening right now, but this was years and years ago. We were having a little bit of a disagreement in regards to his lifestyle and my lifestyle in regards to our working environment, and he made a comment where I took the easy route to go out west and to make the big money. And people that work in this industry, that was like I got punched in the face. So I took extreme offense to that comment. We had a little bit of a communication breakdown, and it took us some time to be able to get back to aligning ourselves to have that same relationship. But that was the mindset of people that have never stepped foot into a fly in, fly out, rotational work environment. It's just all they see is us come home with, dollars in the bank, and you're buying a new truck, or you're going on a vacation, and that's what they see. They don't see the struggles of being away from your family and friends, and missing the Christmases, and having your life flash before you, like the blink of your eyes, to go away and to support and to build the best life that you can for yourself. So changing the mindset for our friends that live outside of that environment is, I think it's still something that's real and needs to be addressed as well, for sure. So good point, Francisco.
Yeah, I'll add another thing, because earlier it was mentioned, asked about telehealth and things like that. And I'm very proud of our site. We did, and actually Sarah's report So I'll kind of answer two questions. I seen one come up that asked, how do we get upper management involved? And we're sharing our own stories. One of the things is Jason and myself and numerous others. We lead through vulnerability, right? We actually share our vulnerability first. It's hard. It gets easier with every kind of sharing, but there's always new stuff that pops up. But one of the things is Sarah's report on the oil sands that landed in my lap during a particularly tumultuous time in my lap, and I seen that, and I shared that with my management, and I said, listen, can we not bring a counselor to site? And it's talked about EAP programs or EFAP, and one of the things is with those, they can be cumbersome. I'm not sure we necessarily do a great job evaluating how the service is provided. Oftentimes it's a phone call to the 1-800 number, you get put on hold, and then you wait, and then you talk to somebody, and then they'll refer you to somebody, or they'll say somebody will call you within 2 or 3 days. And then, so one of the things, and particularly for men, and I'll speak from personal experiences, is we're really crappy at asking for help. If it's offered, we'll take it, but we're really terrible at asking for it. But when we do finally get the courage to ask for it, is we need that help now. So that's when having somebody call us in 2-3 days, and that's what leads to like tough, very difficult moments and decisions. Like, I'll be vulnerable here and I'll share. Like, I was actually, realistically 3 deep breaths from ending my life, because I kind of felt like I'd lost hope. But that's the important part of having a counselor on site, because when people do come and they see the counselor and they can talk to them, and particularly if it's a highly qualified counselor that family members can call into and have and use company benefits. The benefits very important as well. So then that way you integrate both the worker themselves, but also their family. You bring them into kind of the treatment, and it helps both parties. So by having the counselor on site, the counselor also gains a ton of credibility because they have the lived fly in, fly out experience. They share the same food. They're in the same lineups as you. They see the struggles. They see how long people work. And then that way, it does help. Like, our counselor has had well over 375 sessions. We did a trial for a year, comes in for 4 days every other week. And that many sessions, over 155 first-time users of a mental health service. So that was like a tremendous win. I initially didn't think people would use the service as much because of the stigma of, oh, hey, I don't want my colleagues to see me asking for help. But what I didn't realize and think about is sometimes it's easier to go see a counselor when you're away from your family, because for your family, you feel like you have to be strong all the time, stoic, right? That old masculine stigma. Whereas when you're away at work, well, then there you can actually afford to break down with a counselor, and you don't have to come back to your family with red eyes because you've been crying and try and explain why you were gone for an hour. So I do believe that, we should almost treat mental health counselors almost like having first aid attendants at site. We reach a certain amount of workers, certain remoteness of the site, then we need to almost treat it the same.
Thank you, Francisco, and thanks for sharing those personal insights and experiences that you had. It was very difficult to share, especially in an environment like this. So many of our speakers today have talked about, maybe signs and symptoms, for some suicide or, compulsive behaviors that are pretty rampant in this type of industry, especially with the fly in, fly out workforce. Drinking, cigarettes, drugs, gambling, all these things tend to get out of hand quickly. So do you have any coping mechanisms that you've utilized or that your team has utilized, to kind of avoid those issues?
Yeah, Fran, I can jump jump in here first on this. So basically, folks, after I was educated on my own anxiety and PTSD, I kind of researched the traditional stuff in regards to utilizing medication to cope, and then I found that wasn't really working with me. So over the last 4 years, what I've done is I've kind of gone non-traditional. So I've really started to study breath work through Wim Hof, along with his cold therapy. So those, between your breathing and your cold therapy, those are two things that I do on a daily basis, basically, to be able to walk myself or guide myself through having an anxiety attack on site. So those are two tools. If you're not familiar with Wim Hof, I suggest that you take a look at the programs that he has available to be able to support stuff like this. So cold therapy is, it's come a long way, and the benefits that it shows to deal with anxiety and PTSD is, the data is out there for sure. So
Yeah, Jason, and the one thing is, and I'll speak personally, is like so I have like I participate in a men's group, for instance, called Connected Men's, led by actually fella Mike Cameron, and he's a partner in my website to help. But it's just allow it, it's talk about the emotional fitness for men. So my generation, I'm nearly 50 years old. We're not really taught or had really good role models on what it is on how to like feel our emotions. We tend to have hungry, tired, angry, happy, sad, and we don't have the gray of in the spectrum of the emotions. We don't have how to deal with those. And it's one of those things, is you get together and you talk with guys, and it's about holding a safe space for one another. Like, we're not even in the same cities. We're spread across Canada, and just being able to have that time. So for instance, like every other Wednesday, we get together and we share, do some like breathing exercises, some meditation. It's one of those things like talks about you don't have to perform right now. You don't have to, right now it's all about centering yourself, and those help, right? Like Jay talked about the Wim Hof, the cold therapy, all those things, and all those things really do help so much.
Thanks, Francisco. And another question I had, and we've talked about this kind of off and on throughout this, and then I think everyone has mentioned it in one way or another today in their presentations. But oil and gas workers, there seems to be a huge stigma for multiple reasons, whether that's the alpha type behaviors, or but just that stigma for asking for help with mental illnesses. Have you found a strategy to help with that, to make it easier for guys to speak up and speak with counselors?
I guess I'll share what we've done at our site. So our site is very different today than it was even 2-3 years ago, in terms of people talking about emotional health, mental health. What we did is we really aggressively, and I'm very happy that our leadership allowed us to, shouldn't say allowed, supported us in bringing the counselor, starting all these initiatives to help make life at camp better, provide these resources. And at Toolbox Talks, we'd have mental health moments where we'd talk about, okay, this is a strategy if you're feeling anxious. Or we had, for instance, we talked about mindfulness. We have our, one of our groups has the Mental Fitness Fridays, and it's a little newsletter that goes out every Fridays. We have monthly mental health themes, and we just share and we have those conversations. We've done the Working Minds training for our supervisors to help recognize people struggling and try and direct them to the help they need, or even just being there. It's pretty comprehensive. One of the things Sarah spoke about it, and it's very important that this also be something that's peer supported, because Jay and I will both talk about how it's our buddies at work and away from work, right? So you have like a buddy program, out of BC, you've got the Heads Up guys, and they provide mental health resources for folks. The Buddy Up program, as Sarah spoke, Mates in Australia, even sites like mine and like my men's group, Connected Men, like all those things, those are supports that help us cope with the isolation, with being able to speak about what we're feeling. And I can say that the stigma at site about mental health has actually gone quite a bit, is a lot less than it was 2 years ago, because we've been open and talked about it a fair bit and honestly, and it hasn't been, I don't feel like a tick in the box. Oh, we talked about mental health, we've done it. We've actually kind of put some resources behind it and some genuine effort.
Awesome points, Francisco. Yeah, I can add a couple things to that, to just specifically on, again, what Bird Construction is doing right now. So what we're doing is, I've had the opportunity to kick off an employee resource group within the last couple months, and it's specifically, regarding how we're going to, put our tools in place to be able to support our colleagues, our coworkers, our brothers and our sisters while we're at work. So first and foremost, for us, we need to have buy-in by our executives, and I can guarantee you that speaking specifically for my company, that they have bought in from the executive level. So kicking this erg off at this this time and place is it's all aligned with exactly where we're supposed to be moving forward. So a few of the things that we're looking at are what Fran is hitting about. It's having counselors available. It's having enough resources that are on our site that are not just first aid trained, but are mental health first aid trained. And it's giving our people a safe place to go. If you're having if you're in the middle of having an anxiety attack, I'll share one that about 10 days ago, I had a panic attack at work. So I've got 2 people that are on my project that if I walk into them at any time and I put my hand up, that means that I need help. So I was having a panic attack. It was first thing in the morning, about 8 o'clock in the morning. We just had our morning toolbox talk and our stretches, and I could barely get through our stretches without, falling to the floor. So I got myself to my office and I could feel the panic attack coming on. So I had to get into a boardroom where they were having a meeting. I went in, put my hand up. Both these 2 people knew automatically what I was going through. So they came to my office, closed the door, and then we went through the processes for them to be able to allow me to vent. And then they did what they needed based on our earlier conversations. At that point, I couldn't even be at site. So they made somebody available to take me off site, via my vehicle. And that person stayed with me throughout the process of me having a panic attack. So through Bird, through our ergs, these are the things that our future forward thinking is we're going to put the right people in the right places to be able to manage a person like myself having a panic attack at work. So we've got short-term goals and long-term goals. Some of the short-term stuff, like I talked about, is ensuring that we have the right people trained and educated to be able to support on sites. And long-term goals is we're going to look at doing things as an organization where we're doing quarterly conferences to bring in keynote speakers through FIFO groups to talk about specifics from anywhere from anxiety to PTSD to, just dealing with general anxiety. And then we'll use resources such as Wim Hof and cold therapy to give people the tools to work through those stresses at work. So I think it really needs to start with our corporations. These big groups that we're working for our fly in, fly out, for our drive in, drive out, need to not just use a Bell Let's Talk as a one time a year. This is a thing that needs to be 365 days. We're talking about it, we're being vulnerable about it, and they need the support from the top up. And that's how we're going to succeed and be able to move forward as big outfits. So
yeah, Jason, you're absolutely right. Like I put it in the chat, is leadership, executive leadership has to look at mental health as an investment versus a cost, or initiatives as an investment as a cost. There was that an Australian study out of the Western Australia University, and it stated in their construction industry, for every dollar spent on mental health initiatives, there was a $5.70 return of investment on that dollar. So it's an investment. It costs money on the front end, but it actually pays dividends on the mid and back end. So it's so very important for the right mindset for it to be looked at, I think.
Oh, thank you, Francisco. So I'd like to turn to the audience, but I've seen a number of really good questions come in. Any of you have placed a question in the webinar chat? Would you please put it in the question and answer section, make it a little bit easier for me to find as we go through these? So to start, we had a question. Have either of you sought assistance with on or off-site mental health services or support groups?
Yeah, I think Francisco and I are both putting our hands up. I think we've both gone down that road, and that's a great question. I've done personal counseling sessions numerous times throughout the 4 years, and I've also and this is a really good resource. So I looked into hypnotherapy and NLP work to be able to cope with anxiety and depression. And to be honest with you, out of the traditional kind of therapy group sessions that I was involved in, I honestly found that I got more use and more tools out of doing the hypnotherapy along with the NLP work. I just found it was the communication that I was able to gain through that professional with my own experience enabled me to get through some of my struggles. It gave me the tools to be able to break through an anxiety attack. It was able to they teach you how to center your mind to refocus and to get out of that tunnel vision when you're struggling in a certain experience or a certain circumstance. So two different things: traditional, non-traditional. So
Yeah, one thing that was shared with me through I guess my website and my FIFO for Real Facebook group was I had one of my members actually share with me, and they said, you know what, I go see a counselor not just when I'm struggling. I go see them when everything is going great. So that way they have like a baseline of what good looks like for them. And oftentimes when you're in those, I'll say in the zone or high performing areas, and I never thought of this, is actually when you actually are in a better position to, I guess, incorporate learnings from those sessions and things like that, and understanding, okay, what is it that helps you be in that space versus trying to look at it and remember down, before, hey, I was like, when we're in those terrible moments, we're stuck in those moments and we go to counseling, right there, it's very hard for us to walk away and say, okay, my counselor said this, I'm going to do this, right? Sometimes head knowledge doesn't result in action, but it was actually pretty significant to me that was a light bulb moment for me when they shared that, no, I go to the counselor when I'm feeling great. And I was like, wow, that's actually fantastic.
Thank you. What do you find helpful to say to yourself before you walk in the door when you get home? You talked earlier about kind of compartmentalizing your work versus your home life. So is there something that you do that kind of helps put you in the right mindset when you arrive back home?
I'll go first. One of the things that was, and this is the part where that conversation with your partner, I'm, again, divorced, is actually speaking with your partner or spouse kind of beforehand and saying, hey, this is what's important to me. When I come home, for instance, I like to get a hug and a kiss and feel like I'm being welcomed back into that environment versus, off on the computer or watching TV, doesn't get up type of deal. So it's one of those things, doing activities together. That doesn't mean you have to be attached at the hip all the time, but, be honest with what are some of your needs and understand what their needs are. Jason's right when he says, when we come home, we tend to disrupt routines. And that's very true. We do, right? And some of that, I think, is just from the eagerness of us just trying to reintegrate back into that home environment because we missed it so much, and then kind of make a mess of things. But yeah, I guess the communication part, I think can't be understated is being really honest and vulnerable with your partners, because at the end of the day, if you're not, well, it'll show up later down the road.
Yeah, I really can't add much more to Francisco other than the open lines of communication. So basically how my wife and I are kind of running it now is that and we got this through trial and error. So basically on Friday evening when I get home, it used to be I would get home and my wife would take my 2-year-old and she'd hand me my daughter, and then it's go time and I'm on. So and not just added to the layers of stress depending on what kind of work I had. And the stresses from, the drive home in the middle of the winter, all those were lining up. And then I would be basically thrown into here you go, you got to be a father now. So, which is something that I continue to love to do. But what we do now is that my wife knows that on Friday evening when I get home, that she still takes responsibility over parenting her daughter, and I come in and I slowly just migrate back into, being a dad, and they give me an opportunity to decompress from the work a little bit, and then I can slowly kind of jump back into doing what I'm doing. So that's just keeping those open line of communication. And on the drive home, Wesley said, what do you say to yourself when you get back home to kind of get back into the event? If I'm driving home and I'm feeling good and I had a great week, then I don't need that time to be able to decompress. And I call my wife and I'm like, I can jump right back in. Let's get into this. We'll do this together. So it's just keeping that communication open so we can, drive together and keep that wheel running, right?
No, thank you for that insight. Another question came in. Other than traditional counseling, is spiritual counseling used at your sites?
That's a great question. To be honest with you, it's not something that's at my project and throughout my sites, but again worked non-traditionally, trying to open up into that realm as well. But that's something that I think it's a great idea to be able to look at as we move forward, and come up with outside the box thinking to enable ourselves, for our site folks for sure. Francisco.
Yeah, so we do have faith rooms. I haven't participated in any of those. Though I'll share that, like I have my own relationship with faith. And then when you come home, but yeah, that's another area. It's not like we have the resources available. Somebody wants to use a faith room and have, like, say, a group, right? A faith group. We have that, as well as, if somebody wants to start a group, say for like AA or NA, those are also available.
Oh, thank you. A couple more questions. I know we're coming up on the end of our allotted time today, but have you looked at other industries with similar shift work and how they are supporting mental health, such as the military? I know as a lot of military spouses, they have similar struggles. Are there lessons that can transfer over that you have utilized?
I know I've spoken to a lot. One of the challenges that we have compared to the military families is the fact with some of the military families, the partners and spouses and families, they themselves are stationed in communities with others. So it's almost like a community where the spouses are together. Whereas with our fly in, fly out folks scattered around the country, and you might not have people living in the same city. So it might not be as easy to find other families that have the exact same shared experiences, or where their partners, the working partners, are working together. So you build those friend networks. But I know, looking at the military models, like I have asked questions from, the bases at Cold Lake, as well as here in Suffield. We'd love to do something like that, but again, it's, we don't house the families, and that was something that I was told really helped. And they're on much longer deployments than, say, we ever are. We're fortunate that we're not gone for 6 months or a year on a deployment. 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Versus the military folks. So that's very challenging.
Oh, thank you. And one more question. What are some methods that you've utilized to get mid and upper management involved in, sharing their own stories in difficulties with mental health issues with their employees.
I can jump in there real quick. Again, I think it's real fresh with what we're doing with Bird, and I think just the initiatives of being open, being vulnerable, just having the conversation. So we've got our senior management within our construction management team that they're privy to our weekly meetings, and they're stepping up and they're sharing their stories in this environment, just with allowing the craft to see that it's not necessarily just the people that are out in the field that are struggling, that it's our folks sitting in the offices and setting up the big projects that are dealing with it as well. So those conversations are starting to happen, and I've seen that more in the to be honest with you, in the last 2 or 3 years that I'm with this organization. Up until this point, it was still the old mindset that it was hush hush. But I really think in the last 3 to 4 years that the times are changing, and then the senior folks are starting to realize that this is it needs to align with if we've got an event that we see in the field where you've got a first aid, it's the exact same thing, that it's a mental first aid, and the communications are starting to open up between the peer groups. So another great question.
Thank you both. I believe that ends our time today. So in closing, I'd like to thank all the presenters and thank you guys for being willing to talk, and be open and honest with the group on your experiences. And I think that's awesome. So again, thank everyone. And we will see everyone again tomorrow at 12 p.m. Eastern to begin the second day of the summit.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.